I've been thinking a lot lately about my life, about my career, about the way a pivot actually works in your life. So, a little background information on me. I always wanted to be a filmmaker. I always wanted to be a writer, director. I loved acting. I loved everything dealing with filmmaking, and I really love writing. That was my dream all throughout college. Then I graduated college and I had to go out into the world and start a career where I could actually pay my bills. And I did. Slowly but surely, I started to climb the corporate ladder. I started to get jobs that paid really good money. I was able to pay off all my student loans. I was able to buy me a place. I was able to pay off my car. And I was actually able to add a lot of money to my savings account and really kind of build a nice life for myself. But in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking, am I trading all this for my dream? Then I got older. I was 29. The next thing you know, I'm 30, and I'm in my 30s, and my dreams still haven't taken off. But I've got a nice life for myself. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still writing every day. I'm still watching a lot of movies, and I still haven't lost the passion. But I just noticed I'm putting so much time and effort into a career that I never truly wanted. Am I appreciative for it? Yes. Do I like my coworkers? Absolutely. And I'm good at my job. I'm actually great at it. But this wasn't my passion. This was not my dream. A little later, one of the companies I worked for went through a huge transition. Some of my managers were gone. A lot of people started to move around, and I was very unsure about myself. I was up for a pay raise, and once the company went through the huge transition, I had no one to even talk to about my pay raise. And then after a while, I noticed the next year, same thing. Another big transition happened. I tried to talk to some people. Nothing was really occurring. A reality started to set in that I'm at a place now where I'm starting to plateau. And when you're in your 30s, you really don't want to plateau in your career. You always want to be moving towards the next thing. But then I started really asking myself, I've already hit a pretty high level at a pretty young age. What if this is as far as I'm meant to go here? What if I can't sit here? What if I'm plateauing for a reason? And then I started remembering just different stories of people who were stuck in one career, stuck in one life, and then something happened. Something similar to what happened to me. And they had to figure out the next thing they wanted to do with their life. How do you survive a plateau? How do you pivot in your 30s or your 40s or wherever age you are in your life? Because pivots are going to happen throughout life. But how do I pivot? And it actually reminded me of one of my favorite stories of a midlife pivot, which is actually a filmmaker, a screenwriter who I've been following for many years, named Taylor Sheridan. Now, a lot of people know Taylor Sheridan now because he basically runs Paramount Network. I think he's got like 14 shows on there. But I remember seeing him at his very beginning. Some people have seen him on Walker, Texas Ranger. Some people saw him on Veronica Mars. The first time I ever saw Taylor Sheridan was actually in a show that, in my opinion, hasn't aged all that well, called Sons of Anarchy. I believe he played a character named David Hale. And he was basically kind of the strong-jawed, hard-nosed sheriff of the town. And he was not necessarily an antagonist for the Sons of Anarchy, but he was a bit of a foil within the series. I won't spoil Sons of Anarchy, just in case there's somebody out there who still hasn't watched it and is interested in seeing it one day. I will just say Taylor Sheridan was unceremoniously removed from the show. And I kept wondering, why was this character removed from the show the way he was? Why did that happen? It just seemed so forced and so out of nowhere. And so I did a little research and I realized Taylor Sheridan had actually asked for a pay raise on the show. And when he went to the showrunners and the producers, they all basically looked at him and said no. Taylor had hit a plateau in his career. Now, Taylor's career was a little worse off than mine. He said he was only making about $3,000 per episode. And there was only about maybe 10 or 12 episodes per season of Sons of Anarchy. And you got to keep in mind, he wasn't in every episode. He might have 10 minutes in one episode, maybe 15 in another, and sometimes he might only have 3 or 4 minutes in another episode. So his time on screen varied. But then around 2015, 2016, I saw a movie coming out, being directed by a director that has grown to be a cinematic favorite of mine, but at this time he was still relatively new to the American public, named Denis Villeneuve. He also had a cinematographer who I've loved since the Coen brothers, Roger Deakins, shooting his movie. And when I looked at who wrote the movie, it was written by Taylor Sheridan. And the first thing I thought to myself is, the deputy from Sons of Anarchy wrote this? And then I kept doing research. How did this happen? How did Taylor Sheridan go from being a bit player on a TV show on FX to having a movie with a critically acclaimed director, critically acclaimed cinematographer, and basically just a great cast and crew all throughout? I mean, he's got a movie starring Josh Brolin, Benicio del Toro, Amy Blunt. This was actually the first movie I ever saw Daniel Kaluuya in. The movie I'm referencing, of course, is Sicario. This actually became one of my favorite movies of, I believe, 2015 or 2016. I can't remember the exact year it came out, but it was one of my favorite movies that year. And I kept wondering, how did Taylor Sheridan get here? How did you go from being a bit player on a TV show on FX to having this hit movie with one of the best cinematographers working, with one of the best directors working, and with some of the best living actors working? How did this happen? And then Taylor Sheridan started to do interviews, The Hollywood Reporter, and everybody started talking to him. Who is this guy? What happened? And Taylor explained. He was 39 years old while working on FX, making $3 grand a week. And you got to keep in mind, this 3 or 4 grand he was making, this is before taxes, insurance, agents, and everybody else comes and takes their piece. So he wasn't making a lot of money. And on top of that, he had a son on the way. So Taylor now had to figure out, how am I going to take care of a kid? Because I can't feed him with these Sons of Anarchy checks and any of these other bit checks I'm doing as an actor. He was turning 40 and his acting career just wasn't going the way he wanted it to. But while he was sitting in that hardship, he started to get something that a lot of people don't realize. It's something that has to come through pain. He started gaining experience, understanding, and insight, specifically on screenwriting. Taylor Sheridan had played a couple characters that were basically exposition characters. And for those who don't know what an exposition character is, an exposition character is a character who basically comes on the screen and just gives away a bunch of plot points. It's a lazy way that screenwriters give exposition to the audience. Right? The root word of exposition, of course, is just expose. And Taylor started to realize this is a lazy way of writing. So when Taylor started writing, he took the old school lesson that you see in a lot of screenwriting books. Show, don't tell. Taylor has jokingly said, and I quote, "I'm allergic to exposition." Taylor's played enough characters who had to keep always giving exposition that he now realized there's an easier way to do this. And so he wrote a movie that didn't have a lot. They showed what happened. They didn't have to explain everything. Kept the dialogue to a minimum, focused on strong characters, focused on a strong narrative. Afterwards, this was an Oscar-nominated movie. Taylor didn't get nominated, but Roger Deakins did, along with some of the sound people and a couple other things. But overall, people were starting to notice Taylor. It wasn't until his next movie came out that people started to say, okay, Taylor might actually be a serious person. Because let's be honest, Sicario was good, but that could have been a fluke. There's plenty of screenwriters who've written one movie and it was great and they've never been able to recapture that light again. But his next movie is when people started to realize, oh, Taylor's actually the real deal. That movie was Wind River. I'm literally holding the Blu-ray and said the wrong movie. That movie was Hell or High Water. And this was actually the first movie that got Taylor Sheridan an Oscar nomination for screenwriting. During this time, I really started to pay attention to Taylor. I was watching all of his interviews. I was doing everything I could to read up on him because now I'm starting to think, how did this guy do this at the age of like 40? How was he putting out these movies the way he's doing? And how was he putting out such quality? And I wanted to hear his process. And he would say, look, because I was on a lot of TV shows and a lot of poorly written projects just trying to survive as an actor, right? I had to look at all the things that were going wrong and figure out how can I use my talents or my strengths in order to take care of myself later. One of Taylor Sheridan's biggest strengths is his strength for observation. He's good at observing people, he's good at observing behavior, he's good at observing ideologies, and he's good at observing the way a process works. So when he started writing screenplays, he focused heavily on characters, heavily on story, and he didn't really worry about putting a lot of heavy-handed exposition. He didn't feel the need to over-explain. He'll show you what's happening and just hope you're smart enough to keep up. Taylor trusted the audience because at one point he was the audience. So after Hell or High Water, Taylor was heavily on my watch list. I was watching everything he was doing. I was studying all the directors. I think David Mackenzie did a phenomenal job with Hell or High Water. I don't know which one I like more between Hell or High Water or Sicario, but Both of them were phenomenal films. And these were the first two films of his Border trilogy. His third film, Taylor finally stepped up and said, not only am I going to write this movie, but I'm going to direct. So Denis Villeneuve isn't going to direct it. David Mackenzie isn't going to direct it. This time it's going to be me. That movie was Wind River. Now, this is more of a snow western in comparison to the other two, but all three of these are neo-westerns. Jeremy Renner's been one of my favorite actors for years, and so seeing him do a neo-western written and directed by Taylor Sheridan, I was immediately intrigued. And when the minute I saw this movie, it was a tough watch, but it was a great movie. At this point, Hollywood was starting to really come knocking at Taylor Sheridan's doors. And then I noticed he was getting an opportunity to make a new show called Yellowstone. Yellowstone, of course, was starring Kevin Costner, and this became the first segue Taylor Sheridan had into becoming the big powerhouse that he is at Paramount now. Now, I'm not going to go through all of Taylor Sheridan's success because at this point, I feel like it's a pretty common story. Everybody knows it. And for you, if you don't, I'll just give the bullet points. Yellowstone became a huge hit. Paramount started to give Taylor Sheridan a lot of work to make basically anything he wanted. So we've gotten everything from King of Tulsa, Mayor of Kingstown, and a couple of spin-offs for Yellowstone. And regardless of how you feel about the shows or whatever, they proved to be pretty successful. And he just keeps coming out with new shows. And every time a new show comes out on Paramount, it almost always seems to have the produced by Taylor Sheridan or written by Taylor Sheridan stamp on it. Now, all of that success, all of that acclaim, all of the awards, all the money, his ability to finally take care of his son the way he wants to and take care of his wife the way he'd want to, all started because he had to pivot. And the reason he had to pivot is because he was working a job that did not appreciate him. He was working jobs that did not see his value. And he had to take all of his strengths that nobody else really saw for him, and then find a way to utilize those. He didn't go to any fancy film school. He learned screenwriting by looking at what other people were doing and saying, there's better ways to do this. And that right there is how Taylor started his career. Seeing what Taylor did just reminded me, maybe it's time for me to start thinking about my own pivot. And maybe somebody out there, it's time for you to start thinking about yours. Or maybe you're already thinking about yours. The pivot can be really easy. Look at what you already have going on in your life. Look at the strengths you have and figure out a way to utilize them in order to make a better life for yourself. On one hand, I wanted to talk a little bit about the pivot, but on the other hand, I also really just love Taylor Sheridan's Border trilogy. So if you've already made a pivot in your life or you haven't made it yet, check out the Border trilogy. And if you've already made the pivot and you're enjoying the fruits of your labor, check out the Border trilogy. That's all I really got for right now. Thank you.